Norman. I'm a watercolor artist here in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. Today I'll be painting some birch trees, and I'm just thrilled that you're here joining us today. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for being here, and look forward to spending the next few minutes with you. And here we are, part 2 of Birches in Watercolor. If you want to see part 1 and you've missed it, please just go back to our channel and take a look. All right, so we've taken this painting now to a place where we're ready to take off our masking tape resist that we've put on to indicate where our trees are going to go. And the paper, as I say, this paper is almost dry. I would prefer if it was 100% dry, but it's not, and we're just going to take our time. So this tape comes off nice and easy. Again, just the best way to take tape off paper, even when it's dry, is to keep it low to the paper and at an angle. Just very gently pulling that to the side. If you try to lift it up or do it quickly, you run the risk of pulling your paper right off the surface. Now we don't want to do that. I love doing this. It just gives me another sense of what these trees are going to look like when we're done. When in part 1, we kind of were random in how these trees came together, and I love that because nature is random, and we can capture that essence in a lot of different ways. Paints I use today, and that I use every day, that my palettes are all filled with, are Daniel Smith watercolor paints, fine watercolors. And I've been painting with them for many years. They're my go-to. I love the granulation, the pigmentation. They're rich in color, they're vibrant, and very consistent in quality. I know what they can do after years of painting with them. They've never let me down, and people often say to me they can't believe that these paintings are watercolor because they are so rich in pigment, and that's the new watercolor. You can get lesser quality watercolors and different brands where it's still a very pastel and pale look for watercolors, which is great for some applications. I've said before, I have a fairly heavy hand when it comes to applying pigment to my paper, and I love that the Daniel Smith paints are there for me to do that with. All right, so this, and you can see by not burnishing the tape down to begin with, the watercolor has seeped underneath in some areas, and that's almost painted itself as far as the effects of the birch bark on the trees. All right. Next step, we're going to get our trees a little more solid in the mix. Very technical. These came off of, one came off a bag of oranges and one came off a bag of bagels, I think. So they're just little plastic twist closures. This one I've taken, it had some little nubs on it. I've taken an X-Acto knife and scraped those off, and I've taken a sanding block and just sort of burnished the edges a bit so it has a bit of a finer edge on it. This one's straight off the package, and it's got a bit of a thicker edge, so you'll get a more solid line. And what we're going to do, our trusty spray bottle, make sure those paints are really nice and juicy. And we are going to use them to create the edges of our birch trees and bring that bark in. Sky's the limit in terms of color. I've done birch trees and I've thrown in bright purples and bright oranges, and it just gives some highlights and a little pop to the effect. think I'm going to start with a darker color today, and I'm going to start with something that's I've already used in my painting. I don't really want to introduce a lot of other colors. I will introduce perhaps a bit of purple, a bit of orange as a highlight. But for the most part, I want to keep colors that are in the palette that I've already used. It keeps the painting more cohesive and just gives it, for me, a more natural look. So I'm going to start with, I think I'll start with indigo. And I'm just, going to dab this into my paint, fairly thick paint. I'm going to start at one side of my painting and I'm going to work across. If I was to start here and then work this way, of course my hand is going to be touching in the mix. So I'm just touching the edge randomly here and there, press down, pull across. A little bit of wetness, press down, pull across, press down, pull across. This is something that you want to just have fun with. Be random with it. I don't myself prefer to do one right after the other. Trees aren't quite that geometrically lined up. So here's where you can have some fun. And again, when you first put your paint or your masking tape down, it was a bit random. You were making them grow as you went. Now we can do a little bit more design work, solidifying these trays, remembering to keep in mind, with this painting, we have sun in the middle. So my light areas are going to be facing the sun. So the dark colors are great for the outside edges of the trees. And we're just going to quickly go through and if some come a little darker, that's even better. Gives you that lovely depth. Now, when you're putting your plastic down and moving it across, a couple things to keep in mind. You want to get the shape of the tree. So think about when you're looking at a tree. If you're looking at it from up above, your circles are going to be, or not your circles, but your shapes are going to be more scooping up. Okay. If you're looking from below, up on maybe your trees are up on a hillside, they're going to be a little less scooped for the lines around the bark of the tree. So you can maybe scoop it down just a slight bit or straight across. Okay. This one, where the tape sort of had that gap in between, I can make that into two trees. So I'm just gonna, I think I will do that because I can. And so I'm just gonna make the outline of, follow that outline of where that tape had gone, and just define it a little bit more and go with that. You can be a little more heavy-handed with your color near the base of your trees. And that's done with your plastic, laying it down, but then laying your plastic a little at an angle and then pulling it across. Have some fun with this. You can create beautiful bark and tree shapes and designs. Follow a little bit of where the tape went a little different. This one, the tape sort of buckled there. I'm going to use that as being just like a little, maybe a broken branch came off there. So I'm using that to my advantage in the design. Just checking to make sure I didn't have paint on my hand as I'm laying it on the surface here. You can make your own little plastic bits. Take a credit card, an old credit card, and chop it up. Make it to the size that you want, and then work with your shadows. So we're going to go as quickly as we can here. Just random here and there. we can go in and draw branches out if we want to at a later date. And one last one here. Now I've done some dark bits on this side, even though it's the sunny side, but I will add more yellow into my trunk as I go a little further along. Whoops. As you can tell, this one's been well used. All right. Now, I like to just turn the whole thing around and then start at the other side, and again, very random. Here and there, get some indication of some bark happening. You can draw with this. You can make other branches. If I wanted a branch coming out there, I could just make that happen. Don't know what I'd do without my spray bottle. These misters have been a game changer for me. They're just handy to have. And once you get a hang of how you use them, they're good in a lot of different applications. And we'll just... This is something, I mean, this part of it, you can go in and you can fine-tune to your heart's content. Today, in the interest of time, we will move a little more quickly. And okay, so now I've got those colors in. I just want to show you the highlights. So I think what I will do is try a nice light. The quinacridone gold is again something we have in the painting. When it's thick like this, it is quite orangey. You can always water it down. And have some fun. Put some on thicker, water some down. I'm just going to do this one side at the moment, just so you can see how we progress. Don't be afraid to mix some of your colors on your page. And now I'm just picking up some of that watery, mix of quinacridone gold there. Okay. Again, this is another brush that would be more for acrylic or different applications. I love it for my birch trees because I can take this. It has a fairly chiseled edge on it, fairly sharp edge. And I just want it to be just damp. And here again, play around with the amount of water. Give a stroke or two and see whether that feels. But now you can start to blend these colors a tiny bit. Move them around. Move them across your tree a little bit randomly. The quinacridone gold and the indigo together are beautiful. I've just touched a bit of green in there, just for another layer of color, a little bit of depth. You can use your brush to define the edge a little more. And again, if you need to take some color out, wet your brush, wet the page, and dab it off. Wet your brush, just touch the area, lay the water in, clean paper towel, just dab that specific area. Okay. So you can see by lightening up those colors that we've added with our piece of plastic and then just adding a bit of water, the shading that you get with the colors blending on your surface is just so beautiful. Okay. If you want your trees to be not stark white, again, very little water on your brush, very little pigment, or you can just pick up the pigment that's on the tree itself. And then when you go to do the other side, you can turn it around and use that same brush. Dip in some of that paint that's there so that you keep it a little more consistent. Pull those colors into your painting, into your tree. And it will take you a bit of time to get a feel for how much water you want on your brush for different applications. A good thing to have on hand is just a piece of watercolor paper. Keep it beside you if you want to test something out. What will that look like? You know, what will this one look like? What will that one? How will that work together? Always a good idea to have something on the side to work with. So I like to think about when I'm putting this color in, sometimes it almost feels like you're creating that texture, that shadow, almost like a bruised look sometimes, the way the colors kind of blend together and give you that beautiful sense of depth. Okay. So there you have a birch tree. And I will continue on doing all of them the same way. For now, I just would like to quickly show you how to do your ground cover at the bottom here. So we're going to go back to our thick brush, fatter brush, and I'm just going to wet the paper a little bit. Back to the same technique that we had when we did the bushes and up in the trees. So we're keeping that style sort of similar. But we're going to add, maybe we're just going to add a little bit of a rocky base here. So I'm laying the color in fairly thick, fairly rich. Okay, I'm going to go back in with a little bit of green, not too much, just here and there. And the quinacridone gold. I barely touched it, and look how beautiful and juicy that is. And just for fun, because I think when I'm doing the trees a little bit later, I'm going to add a little bit of purple. I'm just going to throw a little tiny bit of purple in at the base here. Also, for anybody that doesn't regularly paint in watercolor, you'll notice I've got 3 different pots of water here, and those are for rinsing. Sometimes I like to use a little bit of darker water just to add a little bit of texture to the paint, or not texture, but shadow, and then one for just clean dipping, nice clean water for when I want to use that on my page. So I've put my paint on nice and thick. I've let it sit for just a moment. I don't want it to be running off the page. I want it to absorb a little bit into the paint, or to the paper. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to take my trusty little plastic tool, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to carve some rocks. So you can make a lovely pile of rocks because they've got some nice color shapes, or color variations in there. Be careful with these because they do have a sharp edge, and your paper is quite delicate. You can damage your paper. Don't know if you can see this very well, but so we've got some rocks now. You can see because the paper was wet, the blue that I put on is sort of creeping up into the yellow. And that's, to me, saying maybe we need to put a little bit of grass there. It's kind of a nice basis for some grasses. And so what I will do then is with one of these little guys is just pull up a tiny bit. I love that there's a bit of purple in there. We'll go in and fine-tune some of those grasses and some shrubbery with a little bit of probably the indigo or the Payne's gray, or you could use the purple too, it doesn't matter. You want to make sure when you're going to put fine lines into your painting that it's dry enough that the water, there's not enough water on the page to dissipate your paint. If you're trying to make a fine line and you want it crisp, your page needs to be fairly dry. But now we can go in and we can there's enough paint on there. Don't know if you can see that. What I want to do with this, because those trees kind of look like they ended in the middle of nowhere, I will go in with maybe a little bit of the gold and a little bit more of the green. And sort of cover up their base a little tiny bit. A little bit of shrubbery happening there. So from here, you can take your painting and fine-tune it whichever way suits your fancy. You can add more color to your birches, play around with just subtle texturing. a little bit of water to the paint that's already there, move that around, use that to your advantage. Put in some rocks, put in some shrubbery, fine tune. We talked about, taking a little damp brush and making your shorelines. So we started off 100-pound Arches paper on a block. We masked off some trees just randomly from our heads. No drawings and no photographs to look from. And wet on wet, added paint, quinacridone gold, Mayan dark blue, a little bit of indigo. We lifted off some of that. We painted right over top of the masking tape. We lifted off some of that with a paper towel to create our clouds. The quinacridone gold we brought down through to the bottom of the page. Then we came in with some Mayan dark blue, some indigo, some sap green mixed with some Payne's gray to make a nice dark green, and the quinacridone gold, and dabbed that in to form some mountain shapes in the background. We took a fine brush with some fairly juicy paint and wet still, because the page was still quite damp. We laid in some treetops. We took a damp brush and we pulled out some of the color to make the water that we decided was going to be there flow a little off to the side. And when we let the page dry, we carefully took the tape off. We went in with a piece of plastic, dipped in some juicy color, and just started to flick in the edges to create those shapes of the tree. I used two colors only, which was the indigo and the quinacridone gold. Then I went in with a smaller, very fine tipped brush. It's square, but it's chiseled on the end, and just damp, and touched the edge where those colors were and pulled them across. And here's where you can have a lot of fun and play with that. Then we went in with some of the same colors that we used in the background in the hills, quite intense. We laid them in wet on wet, so we dampened the paper first, laid the rich pigments of color in, went in with our piece of plastic again, a twist tie off a bread bag, credit card, palette knife, whatever you choose. Just be gentle because your paper is fragile. And then we went in, laid those colors in fairly thick and juicy, let them sit for a moment to sort of absorb into the paper, took our plastic, carved out some rocks, and now it's just a case of fine-tuning. Take a fine tip, draw some branches and different things happening. You can add more branches to your trees as you go along, but there you have birches in watercolor, a fun, quick exercise, and something I think that you will really enjoy and be able to perfect as you go. So please give it a try. I hope you enjoyed doing this as much as I do. Birches are my favorite, and when I sit down to paint, they are what emerges. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for following along today. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe to the channel.